that was a hard act to follow, Lee. Thank you very much. But there are themes. So it was a pre-dawn morning in early spring of 1989, and I found myself waking up on a hard concrete floor in a remote village in eastern Nicaragua along a river. The Sandinista revolution was being ground down by the US-backed Contra War at the time. As I slowly woke up, I smelled wood smoke from the cook fires and a few distant voices, and all of a sudden, an alarming cacophony of roosters. Some were right outside my window, others off in the distance. Lots of roosters. I jumped up and looked out, and basically there were chickens everywhere. So I had come to this town to photograph. I had been asked to come there. I was studying documentary photography in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the university there, and I had been asked by a sister community organization to come to Nicaragua to photograph in this particular community. I had arrived the night before in total darkness, and I really didn't know what to expect. Crowing roosters was like the last thing I expected to wake up to in this war-torn country. A few days later, I would get used to the sound of firefights in the surrounding hills, but for now I was welcomed by roosters, and that was okay. So after I was there for a couple of days, I found a rooming house that was operated by this lovely war widow, hardworking woman with 2 young boys. And I was there for a day or two, and I came back, and one afternoon I found the woman sitting on the floor in this dark living room. It was kind of dark like this space and bright outside. And she had a rooster in her lap. She was stroking this rooster. And the rooster looked completely blissed out. I remember feeling a little envious. So I talked to her for a minute, and she asked me if I would be willing, if I wanted to join them for dinner that night, and I, of course, gratefully accepted the offer. I ran up to my room, and as I was going up to my room, I saw her slowly get up, and she headed to the back door, a rooster under her arm. And I came down just a few minutes later, and she was back in the house doing some chores. And as I hit the street again for the afternoon, I looked behind the house, and there was a kettle on this charcoal fire steaming away. So that night, we ate the blissed-out rooster in a delicious stew with some handmade tortillas that she made with black beans, and we had rice pudding and ripe mangoes for dessert. It was an amazing meal, and I felt incredibly grateful and honored to be part of this meal, and I realized it was a big extravagance for this family. And for some reason, in that part of the world, I feel like poverty and generosity just seem to go hand in hand, and that's been my experience in Central America ever since. So it was maybe the next week, and I was coming down to head out in the morning, and there was a guy standing at the front door, and he's holding up chickens by the feet. And these were very alive, and they're looking around this way and that, and he wanted to do selling the chickens. And the woman who runs this place had the striking resemblance to Diana Ross. Not the attire, but her features. And she looked at the guy, and she says, come back another day, I can't afford a chicken today. And I said, well, hey, I'll buy the chicken if you want to make another stew like that. And she agreed and selected the chicken, and she puts it in the corner and settles it down. And I asked her, I said, hey, would it be okay if I came and photographed you processing this chicken? Because I knew something happened out there really fast, and I was kind of curious about what it was. So at the appointed time, she agreed, and I came back at the appointed time, and once again, she's sitting in the corner, and she's comforting the doomed bird. I throw a 36 exposure roll of slide film into my camera. Everybody remembers film, right? And she again just starts heading for the back door, and I follow her out with my camera. And by the time we come out into the blazing sun, the chicken's already limp. She's wrung its neck with not a flap of a feather. So she sticks the chicken in a pot of water and soaks it for a quick minute, and I start photographing frantically, and she slaps it down on the table, and she plucks this thing, and within a couple of minutes, she's defeathered the bird completely. And she grabs it by the feet, she waves it over the coals, she kind of drags it over the hot coals to get rid of all those little hairs. This plucked a chicken, the little hairs. So she gets that done, she slaps it back on the table, a couple of surgical incisions with a knife, in goes the hand, out come the guts. Waiting dogs are all fighting over the guts. Puts the organs to the side, takes the cleaver, another couple of whacks, the thing's parted up in the kettle. Like 5 minutes max, maybe 3. Really fast. So I get back to New Mexico and put the, turn in the photographs to the organization. And a couple of years later, none of those pictures ever made the cut, by the way. It was too harsh, the light was too harsh. Hands were blurry, they were just bad pictures, so none of them ever got turned in. So a couple of years later, I moved north. I moved up to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I was taking care of a small ranch, like a gentleman ranch. And it was one of my photography professors, so I had a studio and a dark room, and also, among other things, inherited a mixed flock of laying hens, which was awesome. Didn't know anything about chickens, but it was easy enough, and the eggs were amazing, those bright yellow yolks from free-range chickens, which I had never done anything about. I gotta say, up until I went to Nicaragua, I had never thought about chickens. I'd eaten a lot of chicken and a lot of eggs, but I never thought about chickens. And I'm actually not sure I ever saw a live chicken till I was in Nicaragua, when I saw a million of them, probably. So anyway, I'm out at the ranch, and I've got these chickens, and they're awesome. And one time, a broody hen had hatched out a bunch of chicks, and they were super cute. And it was really great, and then those super cute chicks half of them turned into roosters, and basically all hell broke loose out there in the chicken coop. And I would come out and find these cockfights and the chickens, these knockdown, drag-out fights, and I would rehab the loser, and finally my landlord comes out and says, "Scott, you gotta kill some roosters." I'm like, all right, I was a vegetarian, sort of, at the time. And I'm like, he's like, yeah, you just bury them in the garden. So I think back to Nicaragua and my friends there, and I'm like, there's no way I can bury a perfectly good rooster in the garden. So I decided I'm going to eat them, starting with the worst offender. So I head out one morning in the cover of darkness in the early morning, and I stealthily enter the coop, and I snatch one of these roosters by the feet and drag him outside, and I'm not sure who was more freaked out. And I proceed to wring his neck. I had done this as a kid because I was a duck hunter with my brother. And I got it done. I was no Diana Ross, but I got the job done. So I took the rooster back into my utility room, which was next to my photo studio, and I did the thing, dumped it in the water, and for like a half an hour I just plucked away at this thing, finally resorted to some pliers and redunked it, and finally I got most of the feathers and stuff off. And then I started to gut it, and I realized I had no idea what I was doing, and I remembered the slides. So I went around the corner to my studio, rolled out the slides, and I got my loop out, and I got through it. I got the guts out of the chicken, and I got it cut up and in the pot, and simmered that thing all day long. And that night we put some chicken out, and it was really tasty. Unfortunately, it had the texture of like a Super Bowl. So the next day, I put it in the fridge and brought it out the next day and diced up the chicken. I added 2 bags of fresh green chili, like frozen fresh green chili, roasted chili. If anybody's ever been in New Mexico, it's like the state vegetable. I was thoroughly addicted to that at the time. So I added the chili and cooked it again all day, and it was actually pretty good that night. And it got better. And green chili rooster stew kind of became a thing. So I've been back in Maine now for 20 years, and I've pretty much always had a flock of chickens. And I've really begun to understand that chickens are like really good workers, and they can do a lot of work in the garden, and they fertilize and eat bugs, and I've kind of, always learning more about how to work with chickens. Of course, along the way, we've had to butcher a few roosters and older laying hens. And, I gotta say, YouTube videos are a lot easier than slides on a light box. My son over here, Jasper, when he was 5 or 6 years old, could already eviscerate a chicken and get it in a pot pretty quickly. And somewhat gleefully. And that, I think it had something to do with the fact that he'd been chased at high speed across our yard numerous times by pissed off roosters. And I don't think I've ever seen him run as fast since as he did when he was levitating across the yard in front of a rooster. So this past May, as Chris mentioned, I was teaching at the Maharishi University. I teach permaculture out there. Maharishi University is in Fairfield, Iowa, which is kind of a little enclave of ecological consciousness in a place where this tall grass prairie that was there for millennia is now completely destroyed and has been replaced by GMO corn and soybeans. The land and water there is basically being destroyed. All the water is polluted, the land is being eroded, the soil is dead, it's lifeless. And it's this onslaught of corporate industrial scale, government subsidized, chemical intensive agriculture that's just laying waste to really the entire Midwest and vast amounts of the planet. So while I'm there teaching in Fairfield, the dean of the department comes one day and he shows me this poster, and this guy is coming and he's going to do a lecture, and he's going to do part of it in my classroom during my class time, which I thought was a little strange. The guy's going to do a lecture on regenerative or poultry-based regenerative agriculture. And there's a picture, this cartoon picture of the guy holding a chicken, and I'm like, what? Anyway, nobody in the department seemed to really care much about what was happening, and he was dubbed the Chicken Man. And everybody's like, well, when the Chicken Man comes. So his first talk was off campus. So I wanted to find out what was going on. So I went out to meet him. I rode my bike out off campus a couple miles. And I got there, and it was just, this man was there by himself with his assistant getting set up. And I had a few moments to talk with him. His name was Reynaldo Marroquin. And I asked him a little small talk, and kind of tossed him a few hardball questions about this model, because I was kind of reluctant to anything with a model. Just, it's like you can't apply a model to everything. And the more I asked him questions, the more his answers were really intriguing to me. He got kind of intrigued by my line of questioning, and we kind of became fast friends, and we knew that we each got it, kind of. So the man, Reiki, had grown up in Guatemala back in the 70s and 80s during the great genocide there, on a farm. And he now lives in Minnesota, of all places, and he's developing this model for regenerative agriculture where he raises 3,000 chickens at a time, which seems like a lot of chickens, right? But when you know how many chickens are in those cages, in those CAFOs, in those barns, it's a tiny amount of chickens. But his thing is expandable, it's replicable. So they can do 30,000 chickens in 10 of these modules. And his chickens live in what's essentially a permaculture food forest in paddocks. And there's an overstory of oak trees and chestnuts, and then hazelnuts and elderberries, and then he grows his native and grazing on grasses and clovers and bugs and grubs and scratching, and really living a wonderful chicken existence. Until, of course, they have that one bad day. So Ray came and explained all this in my classroom, and all the people that were skeptical were really super excited. And one of my students throws his hand up and he said, well, sir, what are you going to do when people find out about this style of agriculture and it's kind of challenged the system? And he pointed out that not only are these chickens more nutritious and flavorful, but this model of chicken farming rebuilds soil, takes carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide sequesters it in the ground and in all these trees. It helps rebuild communities. It restores dignity back into farming in the planet. The student was very excited about that, but he said, well, Reggie, what's going to happen when the powers that be find out? And he's like, gets this kind of wry smile on his face, and he kind of starts to wax poetically back to the days when he was a young man in the jungles in his guerrilla tactics of eluding the Guatemalan military. He's like, don't worry.